Your brain does not make mistakes, but it sure as heck can make choices that we don't want it to make. My name's Brian. I've been in the health and wellness world for close to 20 years, and I've been in the pro-metabolic world for almost 10. Today, we're going to talk about addiction. First off, just so we're all clear, addiction is a very misunderstood situation that somebody might find themselves in. There's a huge amount of judgment around the word. There's a huge amount of moral and ethical connotations that word conjures up for people. And when you hear the word addiction or addict, what you're often hearing as an undertone of those conversations is that there's a flaw. There's a character flaw or a moral flaw or a genetic flaw in that person. And I'm here to tell you, first and foremost, that's not a flaw. It is a normal behavior that follows a certain sequence of actions, a certain sequence of stimuli, and the brain learns that that addiction, that behavior is serving a purpose. And if we want to change addiction, we need to change the conversation around it. In order to change that conversation, we need to change our understanding of why we actually have these behaviors in the first place. Marion Diamond, a famous neuroscientist, she passed away in 2020. She was a pioneer in what was dubbed an enriched environment neuroscience. And what this particular field of neuroscience looked at was what happens when you enrich the environment of animals. In her experiments with rats, what she found was that the rats that had very bland, bleak, non-stimulating environments compared to rats that had very stimulating, very enriched environments, lots of toys, hamster wheels to run in, all sorts of things to walk through, mazes, toys to chew on, all sorts of stuff. When she compared those two environments, the rats with very little stimulation had weaker, smaller brains, and they didn't live as long. They weren't as healthy. They were also more violent, more hostile, more stressed out easily, and that carried on into the offspring when those rats were allowed to reproduce. And in the rats that had more enriched environments, those rats had bigger, healthier brains, more progesterone in the brain. And not only that, when they were allowed to reproduce, those offspring that they created also had those shared characteristics. So we can think right from the onset that the environment has a huge impact on the health and integrity and functionality of the brain. And if the brain is what's making decisions about behavior, then we need to consider that the structural components of the brain that are going to drive choices and decision-making about behaviors, there's going to be an underlying environmental impact on that. So let's talk about your brain for a second. Your brain's number one job is survival. It wants to keep you alive. And if your brain doesn't know how to keep you alive, it's going to figure out the best way to do so with the information it has. And if your brain is missing information because you don't go outside, you don't get a lot of movement, you don't get a lot of sunlight, you don't get a lot of sensory information, the brain is missing activation. It's missing stimulus. And when your brain is missing stimulus, what it'll often do is find a way to create activation. And so if you introduce certain chemical substances that create an activation in certain brain areas that were otherwise lacking, woefully underactive, then all of a sudden the brain says, whoa, wait, you did that thing and we got the activation we were missing. Let's go do that thing again. Because that's what your brain does, is it likes to seek out the stimulus that it needs. And so when you introduce a chemical substance or you introduce a behavioral addiction into the mix, your brain says, that gave us the thing we liked. Let's go do that again. So your brain is just doing what it's going to do. We just happen to associate certain words or certain behaviors as being moral or ethical and in need of therapeutic intervention. But it's no different than saying, oh, go play basketball. If basketball gives somebody all that activation, if basketball gives somebody and their brain all that information it's missing, is that not an addicting behavior? Well, it's obviously healthier, but it's the same end goal. the brain says, whoa, you do that thing, let's reward you with that and create plasticity to go and create that behavior again. So you do that thing again and we get that information again. So when it comes to behaviors and addictions, it's no different. So we see the same thing with the rat park study, another famous study in the behavioral sciences and in the addiction world. The rat park study, again, took a very bland, bleak environment, got a bunch of rats addicted to cocaine water. They put cocaine in the water. The rats would say, whoa, this water is amazing, tons of activation. And they chose the cocaine-laced water over the non-cocaine-laced water. So they gave those rats cocaine water, got them addicted to cocaine, and then they changed the environment. They gave those rats more things to play with, more mazes to run in, more hamster wheels to run through an indefinite amount of time. They gave them stimulation. And lo and behold, when they introduced cocaine water and regular water to the enriched environment, the cocaine-addicted rats preferentially chose the non-cocaine laced water. They chose the water that didn't have cocaine in it because they had enough stimulation in their environment. So we can see that right there, the environment and the stimulation gave the brain activation that it needed. It no longer needed to make up for activation with chemical substances. So by giving the rats a better environment, it changed their addictive behaviors. And you might be saying, but Brian, those are all rats. Those are rat studies. Those don't pertain to humans. Well, let's talk a little history for a second. Let's talk the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, one of the most troubling aspects of the Vietnam War, and there were several, but one of the most troubling, especially as it pertains to addiction, was the number of troops that got addicted to heroin and opium while they were overseas. In fact, this was such a big deal, so widespread throughout the military. The Army actually commissioned a special study on what's going to happen to these troops when they come home. They're addicted to heroin. They're addicted to opium. If they're going back home with these addictions, that's going to ruin and spread this addiction through the U.S. And so they were very, very fearful of what the ramifications of these drug-addicted soldiers coming home was going to be. But what they found was something completely unexpected. When these soldiers left Vietnam and they came home, 95+% of them stopped being addicted to drugs within 6 months. I'm going to say that again. 95+% of them were no longer addicted to heroin, one of the most addicting substances out there. Same with opium. And why was that? This is the big thing. Their environment changed. Between dealing with a stressful military setting and dealing with a peaceful, non-wartime setting, the brain no longer needed to create the behavior of addiction, to create the behavior of seeking out substances that changed the perception of reality. Because now the reality that the brain was experiencing was novel, it was different, it was less stressful, with better food, better sleep, better sunlight, better everything. And the brain said, you know what? We don't need to be addicted anymore. It was an unbelievably successful intervention in the addiction of these soldiers, and all they had to do was bring them home. So I say this with the one big thing that I want you to think about. The big point I want to drive home, if you're struggling with substance abuse, if you're struggling with porn addiction, if you're struggling with phone addiction, being on your screens all day, if you're struggling with checking your email all the time, whatever it is that you're addicted to, it's not a fault of your brain. It is how your brain is designed. What we need to do is consider that potentially your environment is missing major pieces of information for your brain to figure out a different way of viewing the world. And if you want to break the behavior and the addiction that your brain is seeking out all the time, you might need to change a huge component of your overall everyday environment. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you found this interesting. Be sure to like the video below. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys soon. Take care.